preach it. When Donald Trump was inaugurated, he said something that really surprised me. He announced the beginning of a golden age, and I thought, wow, golden ages are usually seen in hindsight. And there's a reason for that, because it's really hard to know whether we're living in good times or bad times. Now, in many ways, the United States has had something of a golden age since the 20th century. Sometimes the 20th century is called the American century, but our president isn't short on making big announcements. So there you have that. Last week we talked about Solomon's golden age. And it's easy to see Solomon's golden age in retrospect. Never before and never since had Israel dominated its neighbors or been in control of so much territory. And the capstone of that was this golden temple that Solomon built. And the Spirit of God settled in on the temple. Riches rolled into Solomon's kingdom. He was wealthy. He was powerful. The Queen of Sheba comes from a great distance because she heard about his wisdom and she heard about his golden kingdom. That golden kingdom, well, was this God's plan for Israel? In the book of Exodus 19, God pretty much stated his plan for Israel. Then Moses went up to God, and the Lord called him from the mountain and said, "This is what you are to say to the descendants of Jacob, and what you are to tell the people of Israel. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt." Now, Egypt was a superpower. Even Israel at its height couldn't match the splendor and strength and power of Egypt. And if you go to Egypt and you see those pyramids, you're like, wow, those are really old. Egyptian power is very, very old. Egypt has been a perennial powerhouse centuries after centuries. And the Lord said, "You saw what I did to Egypt, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you obey me fully and keep my commandment, then out of all the nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." That's a nation set apart. "These are the words you are to speak to Israel." Now, under Solomon, was that mission accomplished? Well, in some ways, yes. Solomon's wisdom, his fame was renowned, and people came from different places to see him. The people lived in security and prosperity. There's an element of that, but it didn't last. A friend of mine, Jordan Hall, I've spoken about him in some of the sermons, and I've done some events with him. I just had a chance to spend some time with him. He's living in North Carolina now, and that was near where I did the conference. He was just recently on a live stream, and he said something which he hasn't been a Christian for very long, but he's a very smart guy, and he's a fast learner. And he basically said something like, the church always fails. And that's true. The church does always fail. Churches rise, and then they stumble. Every local church rises and falls. No church completely satisfies or gets everything right. Sometimes churches fail catastrophically. You know, the whole pedophile priest sex scandal in the Roman Catholic Church, that went through the Roman Catholic Church in America like a sigh. Churches are made of people. And we are fallible. And churches themselves, we think, oh, and we have these moments in church where it's like, it's really happening. I feel God's Spirit. Everything is right in the world. And like that old song, "If I Could Put Time in a Bottle," we can't. And it goes. This age can only hold so much kingdom of God. Americans are very used to this. So if you go onto social media, you see on one hand all the doomerism, financial collapse, ecological collapse, alien space object, Population collapse, political implosion, civil war, rise of China. If America is anxious about it, you can follow it. You can find it on YouTube. I swear, it's all there. Comparisons with the Spanish Empire and the Roman Empire and the English Empire, and America's empire is next. We're spending ourselves broke. I think we probably are. Will that cause it? Golden age? I don't know. Solomon's empire collapsed. It didn't even last one generation after Solomon. Israel and Judah had become second-class states. Judah with her old tribal holdings, plus border areas in Philistine land and the Negev, and perhaps a little bit of Edom. Israel with the old tribal holdings, plus some Canaanite cities, and a little bit of Aramean land that was contested east of the Sea of Galilee. The empire of David and Solomon was gone. And we may assume that the economic consequences of this were serious. Tribute ceased to flow in. With the trade routes along the coast and through the Transjordan no longer Israelite monopolies, and with the internal strife making the free passage of trade difficult, if not at all times impossible, most of the lucrative ventures undertaken by Solomon collapsed. And although we lack direct evidence of it, the economy of Israel must have been severely damaged. Now, of the two kingdoms, in some way, the north had the better of it because they were larger. They had 10 tribes. They had better connections to the surrounding nations. They had better land. If you look at Judah, they've just sort of got a bunch of hill country. Can't do a lot with it. But the north had a problem. The temple was in Jerusalem, and Jerusalem was in Judah. And you can't have your population traipsing down there all the time, bringing their sacrifices, bringing their gold, bringing their wealth, and leaving it in Jerusalem. So Jeroboam, the first king of Israel, says, tell you what we're going to do. Let's found 2 new temples, and let's put one on either end of the kingdom, and we'll do the golden calf thing again. So now suddenly in Israel, you have temples to the Lord, and they're worshiping golden calves. The north is also politically unstable. In the south, they have the dynasty of David and Solomon and their sons. But in the north, generals are killing the king and taking power. And so you have these constant coups and constant turnover of the royal families. They have more exposure to foreign gods. They have hostile neighbors. They're wealthier and more prosperous, but they've got these downsides. Eventually, a really strong king arises, and you almost never hear his name, but he's there in the Bible. It was Omri. And in fact, we know he was powerful because the Assyrians, long after Omri's house collapsed, the Syrians still called Israel the house of Omri. Although the Bible dismisses his reign with 5 or 6 verses, Omri was obviously a man of great ability. The Assyrians referred to Israel as the house of Omri long after his dynasty had been overthrown. Omri's policy for Israel's recovery was patterned in its major features on what David and Solomon had done. It called for internal peace, friendly relations with Judah, close ties with the Phoenicians, and a strong hand east of the Jordan, particularly against the Arameans. This policy was launched by Omri and set forward by his son, who is more famous because we hear a lot more about Ahab than Omri. And when you think Ahab, you think, why is that name so familiar? Captain Ahab, Moby Dick. Nobody names their son Ahab, but everybody knows the word still. Ahab, in a series of steps, owing to the nature of our sources that cannot be arranged chronological order. Omri himself sealed an alliance with the king of Tyre, named after his god Baal. Remember how we looked at Nebuchadnezzar and Nebo and his god? By marriage of Ahab to the latter's daughter Jezebel, another famous name that I once made the joke about. Nobody names their daughter Jezebel. sometimes people do. The alliance was mutually advantageous. Tyre was at the height of her colonial expansion. Carthage was founded in that century. Being partly dependent on imports of foodstuffs, she offered to Israel both an outlet for agricultural production and numerous commercial opportunities. Tyre and Sidon are these little Phoenician cities, and Israel has lots of crops to sell. And so it's a really important partnership. Tyre, for her part, desired a counterbalance to the power of Damascus, that's north of Israel, and the reactivation of trade with Israel, and via Israel, the lands to the south. The next step was alliance with Judah. By early in Ahab's reign, if not before, this was formally arranged by marriage of Ahab's daughter or sister, Athaliah, to Jehoram, son of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah. So now there's a marriage alliance between them. There was not the slightest reason to assume, as so many have, that this was not a friendly treaty between equals. The alliance was both militarily and commercial, for we read subsequent of an attempt to revive the overseas trade from the southern kingdom. Although the attempt failed, the fact was it indicates an attempt to recapture Solomon's wealth. Now, if you were an observer looking at this, you would say, the gods are pleased with Omri. Omri is being blessed. Not since the days of Solomon and David have we seen a house of Israel so powerful, so wealthy, so blessed as that of Omri. And it raises the whole success equals God alignment and common religion question. In the 38th year of Asa, king of Judah, Ahab, son of Omri, became king of Israel, and he reigned in Samaria over Israel 22 years. Ahab, son of Omri, did more evil in the eyes of the Lord than any of those before him. And so now an ancient person would say, if he's doing evil in the eyes of the Lord, why is he so wealthy? Why is he so powerful? Why is he so successful? He not only considered it trivial to commit the sins of Jeroboam, that's the one that took the kingdom away from the house of David. He also married Jezebel, daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians, and began to serve Baal and worship him. He set up an altar for Baal in the temple of Baal that he built in Samaria, his new capital. Ahab also made an Asherah pole and did more to arouse the anger of the Lord, the God of Israel, than did all the kings of Israel before him. In Ahab's time, Hiel of Bethel rebuilt Jericho, and he laid its foundations at the cost of his birth-born son, Abiram. And he set up its gates at the cost of his youngest son, Segub, in accordance with the word of the Lord spoken by Joshua, son of Nun. Jericho was like the gate into the kingdom, and to have a strong fortress there meant trade money and security, and the Lord told Israel, don't rebuild that city. I am your strong fortress and your security. The northern kingdom says, let's just have our fortress anyway, even if it costs us our children. Now, Doug Wilson, who gets a lot of attention for making talk about Christian nationalism, says his shortest definition of Christian nationalism is stop making God mad. But that poses the difficulty, because in some ways that nods into the ancient assumption that when times are good, God is happy and we're pleasing him, and when times are bad, we're angering God and we're displeasing him. And it gets back to the whole golden age question. Are these good times or bad times? And some of you might say, well, these are good times. Or some of you might say, these are bad times. More often, we look around and we say, oh, these are bad times. And then if I ask you about 20 or 30 years ago, you'll say, those were the good times. That's called perception. Because 30 years ago, if you remember your parents, what did your parents say? Oh, these are bad times. Observers of the house of Omri and many empires after would say, surely he's been blessed by the gods. Now Elijah comes out of the blue. Now Elijah the Tishbite from Tishbe in Gilead, that's the Transjordan, said to Ahab, "As the Lord, the God of Israel lives, whom I serve, there will neither be dew nor rain in the next few years except at my word." Now, Israel's sort of like California. It's a nice place to live because it's not raining all the time. And if you've lived on the East Coast where everything's always green, you know you pay for it because everything's always raining or snowing. But Israel depends on, we're in this time of year now where we're all starting to watch the weather and we're all looking for those atmospheric rivers to come over and bring. But Israel didn't have Shasta Dam and Oroville and all of these massive reservoirs to hold water in wet years for the dry years. And so when it stops raining, crops stop growing, animals don't have feed, people go hungry, people die. Now you can imagine Elijah comes out of the blue and declares this, and people are like, we're awash in prophets. Let's listen to prophets, good times, bad times, here now. But you can imagine, as the months start going and it isn't raining, someone says, "You know that Elijah? He said that thing." And the longer it doesn't rain, the more Elijah's status rises. And suddenly, where is that Elijah? Elijah's hiding. The Lord is feeding Elijah. He's using birds to bring him food. And then he escapes over to Sidon. And there's a widow who's just about ready to die because the famine is so bad. And Elijah says, "If you make me some bread, please." And she does. And then her jar doesn't run out. You can read about those things. I don't have time to read all of the Elijah stories. They're amazing stories. But it's bad, and people are dying, and now suddenly it's like, well, is Ahab such a great king? Because this is exactly, Baal is a storm god. Baal is the god of atmospheric rivers. No Baal. Asherah is a fertility goddess. You know what? If you don't feed those little animals, you know what they don't do? Have more little animals. The crops aren't growing. Israel's God says, "No more rain until my prophet says so." And suddenly, everybody's going to pay attention to that prophet. Now, Obadiah was a good guy, worked for Ahab, and had been hiding prophets away from Jezebel because Jezebel's like, that God of Israel doesn't want to send rain, I'm going to kill his prophets. So she's just murdering the prophets of the Lord. So Obadiah is hiding them. And then Elijah shows up to Obadiah and says, "Set me up with Ahab." And Obadiah is like, "He's going to kill me." Elijah says, "Don't worry, do it anyway." And Obadiah does. Remember that when you hear Elijah's life threatened. Who's braver, Obadiah or Elijah? So Obadiah went to meet Ahab and told him. And Ahab went to meet Elijah. And when he saw Elijah, he said, "Is that you, troubler of Israel?" "Oh, now it's Elijah's fault it's not raining, huh?" "I have not made trouble for Israel," Elijah replied, "but you and your father's family have." That's Omri. "You have abandoned the Lord's commands and followed the Baals. Now some of the people from all over Israel to meet me on Mount Carmel and bring 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table." So Ahab sent word throughout all Israel and assembled the prophets at Carmel. Elijah went before the people and said, "How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. If Baal is God, follow him." The people said, "Nothing." Because people are fickle. Because people will follow the God that works for them. And at this point, they know that all of the Lord's prophets have been killed or are in hiding, and they think, can't be a very good God if he doesn't protect his prophets. Now, you've got this crazy Elijah, so I'll just keep my mouth shut and wait and see what happens. And then I'll jump on the winner's side. Then Elijah said to them, I am the only one of the Lord's prophets left. Is that true? But Baal has 450 prophets. Get 2 bulls for us. Let Baal's prophets choose one of them, and let them cut him to pieces and put on the wood, but do not set fire to it. I will prepare the other bull and put it on the wood, but do not set fire to it. Then you call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord. And the God who answers by fire, he is God. Remember, Baal is a storm god. You know what fire from heaven looks like? You think, I've never seen fire from heaven. Yes, you have. Just look out in a dark, well, not too much in California, but go out east and look at a night summer sky, and you see fire from heaven. Lighting trees on fire. Then all the people said, this is a good plan. Let's do this. All right. Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, choose one of the bulls and prepare it first. You go first. Pick whatever you want. Set it up however it works for you, however it works best. There's so many of you. Call on the name of your God, but do not light the fire. So they took the bull given them, and they prepared it, and they called on the name of Baal from morning till noon. Baal, answer us, they shouted. But there was no response. No one answered. And they danced around the altar that they had made. At noon, Elijah began to taunt them. Shout louder, he said. Surely if he's a god, perhaps he's deep in thought or busy or traveling. Maybe he's sleeping and must be awakened. So they shouted louder and slashed themselves with swords and spears, as was their custom, until their blood flowed. Here's a blood sacrifice. Surely the gods must see a blood sacrifice. Midday passed, and they continued their frantic prophesying until the time for the evening sacrifice. But there was no response. No one answered. No one paid attention. Then Elijah said to all the people, come here. And they came to him. And he prepared the altar of the Lord, which had been torn down. And Elijah took 12 stones, one for each of the tribes descended from Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord had come, saying, your name shall be Israel. With the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord, and he dug a trench around it. And you can imagine 450 of Baal's prophets cut themselves. All day they've been after it. And here we see this one dude. He's building the altar. Just one dude. He's digging a trench around it. Enough to fill 2 seahs of seed. He arranged the wood. He cut the bull into pieces. Just think about all the work little old Elijah's doing all by his lonesome. And laid it on the wood. And he said to them, fill 4 large jars with water. Pour it on the altar and the wood. I don't want any little spark coming and people say, he cheated. You know, he little like this. No. Douse it. Then do it again. And do it a 3rd time. And they did it. And the water ran down the altar and even filled the ditch. At the time of sacrifice, the prophet Elijah stepped forward and prayed, Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and have done all these things at your command. Answer me, Lord, answer me, so the people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again. Then the fire of the Lord fell and burned up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and the soil, and also licked up the water in the trench. When all the people saw this, they fell prostrate and cried, the Lord, he is God! The Lord, he is God! Wow. This is great. This is exactly what we want. We want to pray and have God show up. And have it be so obvious. There's no charlatanism. It's completely true. So often when we pray, this is what God, just show up and do it for everyone to see. Wow. Then Elijah commanded them, seize the prophets of Baal. Don't let any of them get away. They've been slaughtering God's prophets. It's time for them to be slaughtered. We hear that. It's like, don't know what to say. So they seized them. And Elijah had them brought down to the Kishon Valley, and they slaughtered them. And Elijah said to Ahab, go, eat and drink, for there's the sound of a heavy rain. So Ahab went off to eat and drink, but Elijah climbed to the top of Mount Carmel after he had slaughtered the prophets and bent down to the ground and put his face between his knees. Go look towards the sky, he asked his servant. And he went and looked. There's nothing there. 7 times, Elijah said, go back. The 7th time, the servant reported, a cloud as small as a man's hand is rising from the sea. So Elijah said, go and tell Ahab, hitch up your chariot and go down before the rain stops you. You know what a mountain can be like in the rain with no paved road. Got to get that chariot out of there. Meanwhile, the sky grew black with clouds, and the wind rose, and heavy rain started falling, and Ahab rode off to Jezreel. The power of the Lord came on Elijah, tucking in his cloak and his belt, and he ran ahead of Ahab all the way to Jezreel. It's one of my favorite stories as a kid. Just had to imagine Elijah as an old man. Doesn't say he's old, but I just imagine him just booking and, the chariots behind. Love that story. It's usually when we stop reading. But the Bible doesn't end. The book doesn't stop. Now Ahab told Jezebel everything Elijah had done. One of the images we get about Ahab and Jezebel is that Ahab's kind of a weak guy. And so wow, Jezebel, you won't believe what happened. We were on Carmel and the fire and the slaughter, and it was incredible. Jezebel. She's always, a little later, there'll be a vineyard and a little story about that. And Ahab's blubbering on the bed about Naboth's vineyard. And Jezebel gets up and says, you're king. Kill the guy and take his property. Don't you know how the world works? So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah and said, may the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them. And you would think after this victory, after calling down fire from heaven and destroying, and after slaughtering the prophets of Baal, and after the whole nation saying, we'll serve the Lord, and after outrunning a chariot, that for Elijah to get that message, he would say, ha! Who does Jezebel think she is? I called down fire from heaven. I'll call down fire on her palace. I'll stop the rain again. Why on earth would this woman think she can come after me? That's what Elijah should do. But what does he do? Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. Like what? Obadiah worked with Ahab and was at the risk of his life, was hiding prophets of the Lord after this massive victory where Elijah shows he can shut up the heavens, he can bring down fire. He's like a god in the world. And this woman from Tyre says one little thing about him, and he runs like a little kid. Then he came to Beersheba in Judah. Even he's out of the country now. He's getting out of the country. And he left his servant there, while he himself went another days into the wilderness. It's not even good enough to be in Judah. He's got to go south of Judah. And he came to a broom bush, and he sat under it, and he prayed that he might die. It's bad enough that you run, and now you just want to die? After all of this? I've had enough, Lord. I'm resigning. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. Then he laid down under the bush and fell asleep. All at once an angel touched him and said, get up and eat. And he looked around, and there by his head was some bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. And he ate and drank and then lay down again. Then the angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you. So he got up and ate and drank. Strengthened by that food, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. Then he went into a cave and spent the night. Now, suddenly, the Bible is starting to do this hyperlink thing, and you're like, hey, wait a minute. The great prophet of God who can do extraordinary things with storms, because if you can still a storm, you can make a storm. He's in the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights. But this later person from God, they'll be fasting there. Angels are feeding Elijah. And the word of the Lord said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He replied, "I've been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, put all your prophets to death with the sword, and I'm the only one left. And now they are trying to kill me too." Carmel, it's just in the past. There's this little untrue pity party. You're not the only prophet. And the Lord said, "Go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord." And now we think about Moses. For the Lord is about to pass by. And a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord wasn't in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake. But the Lord wasn't in the earthquake. And the thing is, if you look at biblical appearances of the Lord, sometimes it's like a wind. He came down on Sinai with an earthquake and with fire and with wind. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord wasn't in the fire. And it's like, the Lord can just do these things. No problem. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face and went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. And the voice said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" You think about God saying to Adam and Eve, "Where are you?" God on one hand is so gentle with him. And Elijah is just such a catastrophe right now. Elijah, you want the big God always be winning show, right? That's the God we want. But how do you recognize him, Elijah? Where is he? Can you hear him in the small? Obadiah could. You don't remember his name. Elijah doesn't know how humans' hearts change. He replied, "I've been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left. And now they're trying to kill me too." You're not the only one left, Elijah. Your success has made you kind of a narcissist. The Lord said to him, "Go back the way you came. Go to the desert of Damascus, all the way up. And when you get there, anoint Hazael king over Aram, the enemy of the northern kingdom. And anoint Jehu, son of Nimshi, king over Israel, another coup. And anoint Elisha, son of Shaphat, to succeed you as prophet." I'm going to let you out of your job, Elijah. I'm going to let you out. I got a little more work for you to do, but I'm going to let you go. Okay? I'm going to say yes, but not quite yet. "Yet I reserve 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed down to Baal and whose mouths have not kissed him." So, Elijah, you're not the only one. You're not it. In some ways, you're not necessarily even that important. I'm not your tool. You're my tool. Do big, brawny miracles, does winning work in our hearts like we imagine they do? Israel says, "The Lord, He is God, He is God." Did all of Solomon's success keep Solomon himself on the right path? No, it didn't. The book of Job, Satan comes to God and says about Job, "He's only good because you reward him." That's sometimes true of us. Satan's not wrong about us. Did the northern kingdom never touch the Baals after Carmel? They went right back to it just a few years later, just like the book of Judges. That's how we are. Even Elijah is this way. Yeah, fire from heaven. He's a big man. Jezebel says, I'm going to kill you. Runs away. We are unreliable flip-floppers. At one moment, things look terrible. Israel's gone to the Baals. Prophets of the Lord are slaughtered. Then there's a great turnaround. Baal's prophets are slaughtered. Baal totally owned on the mountainside. Everybody saw it. Elijah gets scared and runs. And the Son of God comes, and his miracles and preaching attract great crowds, and everyone thinks, maybe he's Elijah. Did you read the story? He stills a storm. He raises the dead. He feeds the multitudes. People are anticipating the coming redemption of Israel. And then he's crucified by the Romans, and his followers hide in horror and despair. And then when he rises from the dead, he won't even show up and put his finger in Pilate and Herod's chest. He says to his disciples, I've risen from the dead. I'm ascending into heaven. I'm going to rule over heaven and earth, and you will be my witnesses. And we struggle between faith and doubt. Do we live in a golden age? Are we making God angry? Probably some of both. Probably some of both. The Lord feeds Elijah. The Lord feeds fleeing Elijah. The Lord feeds us. The whole purpose of this meal is, on the night in which he was betrayed, Jesus took bread and he broke it. And they were living under the Romans, and things have never been so bad. Well, there were the Philistines. There were the Persians, there were the Greeks, there were the Babylonians, there were the Syrians. Jesus doesn't follow them in this. Jesus says, this is my bread, broken for you. Do this in remembrance of me. Well, what does that mean? It means you will be my witnesses. It means I'm going to feed you with myself. And bit by bit by bit, I'm going to inhabit you, and I'm going to work through you, and you're going to become like me. And even a prophet like Elijah that can close up the heavens with a word and call fire down. Jesus basically says, I will give you what he never gave to Elijah. I will give you my spirit, and you will be my witnesses. And you may never stop. You may never knock on the governor's door and say, if California doesn't shape up, no more rain until I say so. You could try that. I don't. You might even make the news. If it stops raining, they might find you. What he mostly gives us is the still small voice. To be his follower, to be faithful and true. Probably a little bit more like Obadiah than Elijah. And he says, this is my meal. This is how I conquer. Because Jesus didn't slaughter the servants of Caesar. But look at Jesus' children now.